we say we believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, right? Who proceeds from the Father and the Son. With the Father and the Son, He is worshipped and glorified. That's not acceptable to the Eastern Church. They don't believe that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. They believe that the Holy Spirit is unequal. It cannot proceed from the Father and the Son. That the Holy Spirit is there in the first place. It's not proceeding from any one of them. That's the only issue there. Proceeding from the Father and the Son. And that's the creed. That's the creed that has been accepted by the church all along. Now, in one of there have been many councils. There have been many councils of Trent, many councils, Ephesus, and they have been discussing all this, and they just couldn't agree.
What about the marriage stuff?
Well, that came out after when they separated. They devised their own rules. Or they propose celibacy. We don't.
We're the Latin, right?
We are the Latin Rite.
Latin, okay.
In our rite, you can't.
You can't.
No, you can't.
Why would they put this in a Catholic?
So,
because they're Catholics.
Oh,
so they have their own bishops?
They have their own bishops.
And when they elect the Pope, are they part of that?
You know, the Pope in Rome?
Yeah.
No. The Patriarch is equal to the Pope. That's how they see it.
So who's the Patriarch?
Patriarch is like their Pope. Yeah. It's the top apostle there. But the Pope doesn't look it that way. They look at equal, but the Pope thinks that they're under the Pope.
Yeah.
Because Jesus, in Matthew 16, 17, and 18, has given the keys to the kingdom to Peter.
Right.
And Peter is the first Pope. And Peter was in Rome.
So they belong to the Catholic Church?
They are Catholics. Everything else is the same. The prayers are the same.
Episcopals, they practice almost Catholic stuff.
Almost. But still...
Yeah, they were far left already.
If any, the evangelicals, not evangelicals, the Anglicans. The Anglicans are flocking the church and mass. Many bishops and priests, they're priests and members, yeah. Whole congregations joining the church. I think the Anglican Church is shrinking really fast.
Wow.
That's why the Pope opened a special office to welcome the Anglicans. But they're allowed certain things that are normally not allowed in the Catholic Church. That's just to appease them and make them comfortable and welcome them home.
That would throw me for a curve. I didn't realize that one.
But that has been so.
Yeah.
Remember I mentioned one time that I'm being offered to become, the Eastern Church will ordain me as deacon. Because I've been teaching the Bible for more than a decade. They're willing and able to ordain me as a deacon already. But the Latin Rite won't. I have to take up Masters in Theology, which is beginning in September. So they have their own rules. The Eastern Rite have their own rules. But the bottom line is they're accepted by the church. They're accepted by the church. But the only provision is they have to submit themselves to the Pope before they get assimilated into the church. Get accepted fully. In full communion with the church. They have to recognize the Pope as the supreme leader of the church. That's the only condition. Okay? Marshall?
Gotcha.
Materials.
That's surprising.
February 1. Wow, we're in February. 11 more months, it's Christmas again. So fast, huh? In 2 weeks we'll have Lent. Ash Wednesday is coming. And before we know it, another birthday, another year. Second book of Samuel, 24, the census. Commentary 24, 1 to 25. You know, here it's so easy to underline and highlight. In my other class, I have to point. Flip the page, flip the page. I have a pair of twins in my other class. And they're both like 90 plus years old.
Oh, man.
And both of them are Walker. But they're very, very good. The sincerity, I was looking at the eyes, they were asking questions. There's no way in the world I can just abandon them. You can see the sincerity of the heart and the purity of intention to really know the Bible. This is a very young class.
You're too old to learn.
You're never too young to learn, you're never too old. It's never too early, nor never too late. 3 elements. Contain some elements similar to those, the deaths of the house of Saul. You know Saul, right? First king of Israel.
Yeah.
So Saul was good at first. And then his integrity became questionable. First, there were 3 years of famine. That should be underlined. The earlier tragedy was caused by a sin of Saul. And then we have a sin of David. And the Lord was appeased once David piously buried Saul and his family. Now a similar effect is attributed to the sacrifice offered by David on the new altar of Jerusalem. Do you know where David is buried? David, King David. Do you know where he was buried? He was buried underneath the upper room where the Last Supper was held. That's where he was buried. So 3 years of famine. Look at the second paragraph. The second book of Samuel anticipates the outcome, which is divine anger and punishment. That anger and punishment should be underlined. In the Old Testament, it's usual that God's wrath has been mentioned, right? As if God is saying, bam! Enough is enough. But what did we learn last week from Jonah? Remember Jonah? From last week, there were 2 lessons we learned from the book of Jonah. What is the first lesson we learned from the book of Jonah?
Mercy.
The implicit, conditional nature of God's wrath and anger. Because what did Jonah do? He spent 3 days all through the city of Nineveh, right? 3 days. This is a big city, the capital of Assyria. And he spent 3 days, and what did he say to the people? What God told him?
In 40 days, you will die.
Jonah didn't even say any reason for hope. Nothing. You know what did he say to the people? In 40 days, you're all dead meat. 40 days. This city will be destroyed. That's all he said. And through the works of the Holy Spirit, guess what? People convert. So, even at the worst case scenario, God's wrath and anger can still change. So that's why we called last week, remember what we learned from Jonah? The implicit, conditional nature of God's punishment. It can still be turned around. And of course, what's the second? We learn from Jonah. What's the second thing we learn from Jonah? We can never write off anyone. Never. Even the worst of people. Sometimes conversion comes from the least expected places. Sometimes. Those hardened criminals in prison, many of them get converted. Many of them get touched by the Holy Spirit. And those are the two lessons we learn from Jonah. And thus, God's anger and punishment is very well stated in the Old Testament, many places. Psalm 32, God's forgiveness. Lord, forgive the wrong I have done. God's forgiveness. We have the commentary here, that's self-explanatory. The Gospel of Mark 6, no prophet is honored in his own country. Jesus is here described by his occupation and by the fact that he is the son of Mary, indicating that probably Joseph is already dead.
Why does it say brother of James, Jose, Judas, and Simon? Are they apostles?
The brothers?
Yeah, are they the apostles they're referring to there? Or the real, or did Jesus have?
Alright, let's read it. Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joseph and Judah and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us? Huh? Who are these people?
And they're the disciples.
Relatives. They're relatives of Jesus.
Cousins, you mean?
They're relatives of Jesus. This James is not James the Apostle.
But they think that Jesus didn't have any brothers and sisters.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what do you got?
Don't forget that the book of Mark was written by whom? Who wrote the book of Mark? Huh?
Mark.
The Gospel that bears his name. The book of Mark is the Gospel of Peter. Keep that in mind. The Gospel of Mark is the Gospel of Peter. It's like the Gospel of Luke is the Gospel of Paul. Now, who are these guys? They were the relatives of Jesus. They are not the apostles. So why does it say brother? Because brother, there's no word in Aramaic, there's no word for relatives. Everyone is brother.
Oh.
Everyone is brother. There's no Aramaic word for relatives. In English language, it's kind of rich because it has words for just about everything, right?
Yeah.
That's the only reason why it says brother here. I have had apologetics materials on this, the so-called brothers of Jesus. Just think about this. If Jesus had a brother or a sister, it would be totally unacceptable in Hebrew tradition that he was dying on the cross and he would have his mother entrusted to one of his friends, John the Evangelist, if he indeed had either brothers or sisters. It will be totally unacceptable in Hebrew tradition. Hebrew culture will not consent to that. And remember, Jesus was a law-abiding Jew. He was presented in the temple. He was circumcised on the 8th day. So he was following. That alone is good enough explanation that he had no brothers and sisters indeed. In fact, the fourth paragraph.
I just read.
A number of brothers of Jesus and refers in general to his sisters. But the word brother does not mean son of the same parents. It can also indicate other degrees of relationship, cousins, nephews, etc. That's why in Genesis 13:8 and 14:14 and 16, Lot is called the brother of Abraham. But Lot was not the brother of Abraham. See, I knew someone would ask that. So I put it here. We know that he was Abraham's nephew. But there's no word for nephew. So what happened? Lot was the brother of Abraham. They were not brothers. Next paragraph, from other gospel passages, John 19. We know that James and Joseph, who are mentioned here, were sons of Mary of Clopas. We know less about Judas and Simon. It seems that they are the apostle Simon the Cananean. But again, it seems. Remember I had something to say about Simon the Cananean? It was his wedding. The wedding at Cana was his wedding. Simon the Cananean. His wedding at Cana.
That's the